Welcome to Rauta, I'm Jerry, and this time we're gonna go on with some Finnish black metal from Finland, or like the saying goes, original black metal from Finland, episode 10. This time it's three different bands of raw end of style, that is. Obviously each episode features three bands, but this time we go to some of the styles or bands who have decided to go rather raw end of the given style, Finnish black metal. Or in this case, more like two bands are still doing it quite raw. One of them started raw but ended it somewhere else. And this time the bands in question are Warloghe, Baptism and Förgjord. All of these obviously started in the 90s because that's the theme of the series. Decided to not include any of those bands that started after 1999. So that's where we draw the line. This time two of these bands started in 1995 and one of them 1998. However, there is one band that didn't exactly release anything publicly until 2001 or so. There are sometimes recordings which are not listed out there, for band own purposes, rehearsal use, or only and all that stuff. So we'll go with the so-called official information. So this being the introduction, let's start with the first band of the night, called Warloghe. What I've come to know the band since the 90s, we actually played with them with Nightside, I think it was 1998 or whatever in Oulu. And back in the days, Warloghe was only there out with, a demo and EP. Well, to be honest, we didn't have an album out either, so we're not here to complain in terms of comparison. My point here merely is that I got to know the main man of the band already in the late 90s, somewhere around 96, 97. Befriended the lineup back in the days, and it was really great already back then, share the stage and kind of get this, if you can call it black metal Finnish black metal unity or whatever. I mean, we were a bunch of young guys who were very, very serious what we do. We still are, obviously, not kids anymore though. And back in the days, it meant that when there were bands like who were more like in the posers or wannabes of black metal scene, they would get their butts kicked and fuck off and all that stuff. So we got aligned very well with the guys. We're from Warloghe. And that's when I got to know the name means, because I was obviously very curious about it. It means Warloghe. Or that's what I've been told. Anyway, curious, another connection is between Warloghe's Nightside is that the main man actually drew Nightside logo, which we still use to this day. So there's this some kind of a camaraderie or brotherhood kind of a thing going on, or something of that sort. But about Warloghe, so it started with a little bit different lineup than what it is nowadays. Nowadays there's only one guy, Earl Thorth Tyrannus, which is also, I got to know him as the moniker Glowroom back in the days, and he's taking care of vocals, guitars, bass. But past members include some older members like Leppänen. Back in the days, he was there playing drums, and before that, there was another drummer in the band. Now, also Satanic Warmaster's Nazgul is mentioned here playing bass. Don't know if this is actually so much true in the sense that he played as a full member, but yeah, people have been noticing that he has been part of the lineup in live as well. Live musicians show this as well. I mean, if you look at the past members, you pretty much see it here. Werewolf, here it is mentioned Werewolf, and here it is Nazgul. Same guy anyway. So he's been handling guitars on stage. People have been noticing this as well as Mikko Aspa of Clandestine plays for him playing the drums. This is not, I'm telling you this information. This is coming from everybody else. I've seen it, so obviously I know it, and I know actually the other live members personally as well, but I'm not gonna just, include it here because the band, I'm gonna respect the band's wish to keep it anonymous. Let's just say that they are great guys, true guys of the black metal thing going on, so can't really bitch about any of those. So far, it seems to be secret. But about the discography, so much like back in the days every other band started, first you had some demos, maybe even EP before moving to full album stuff, and that was the case with Warloghe as well. So 1999 saw the daylight, an album called The First Possession. It took only 4 years more after a split and all to come with the succeeding album were Womb of Pestilence, 2003. Then something happened. The band was not active or whatever, and it took something like 18 years for the comeback album, so to speak, Three-Angled Void. Now, obviously, there is this EP, Lucifer Essence, in 2017. But be it as may, more than 10 years, nothing was really happening. And now, after comeback, there is this very new album, Logos of All That Ends, from 2025. And the style is curious in the sense that it's always been raw, but not exactly the same way. The thing here is, whatever happened with their first position after the initial smaller releases is that you get a strong Darkthronian vibe. Yes, I'm talking about the 1990s Darkthronian before they decided to do some kind of a proto-heavy metal or punk stuff or whatever they are doing nowadays. So it was very, very much like, kind of a like, I wouldn't say succeeding, but I guess inspiration, or at least partially coming from that stuff, because you can kind of feel that Darkthronian vibe, much like, but different ways than Clandestine Blaze has always sounded a little bit Darkthronian. And that's, I think, very much resonated with a lot of us, after all, we hailing Darkthrone for its, very, very key essence thing coming from Norway, and still my favorite black metal bands of all time, even if they nowadays do totally something different. But already with Warloghe's case, things started taking turn for something else. By the time we got Womb of Pestilence out, you have a different kind of raw end of black metal coming out. Now, I'm not gonna say it's exactly true like this, but what I'm really getting is more like this French black metal style. I'm talking about the raw end. Now people might be thinking of Les Légions Noirs or the Black Legions stuff, what is happening here. Like, bands like Mutilation, Belquetre, whatever. Bunch of bands coming from French scene, which also did their own take on raw and primitive black metal. And what I'm getting really is that feeling. The difference is quite obvious in style, that it's not like doing the same kind of thing, but still keeping true to the very kind of raw, unpolished, primitive style. It's not like primitive, so it's like very punky in terms of riffs. It's not like that. But there's a certain kind of like, let's be honest, let's be true to the roots of black metal when things were not polished and nicely down, sounding clear and all that stuff. And of course, that resonates with the music. The music is not exactly the most melodic. It's not really like something like symphonic or whatever. Or this kind of a third wave black metal where things are so often very dissonant and kind of touching, in a way, the world of death, doom, or whatever with the production. So this is totally different breed. And those who are not ready to just, explore raw end of black metal, especially when it's talking about, these topics like Satanism and darkness or whatever, and I think occult presence is very much the thing here, Warloghe is not for them. But those who are into the kind of a very pure blood black metal, being honest and true to the core ideas or values for that matter in terms of black metal, and like it's sounding raw, well, Warloghe is good band in that sense. And despite this jump from 2003 to 2021 in terms of this gap, this pause, hiatus, whatever you want to call it, the style kind of remains the same in terms of Womb of Pestilence. I would say that the hiatus did a little bit good, because I think it sounds more, in a way, not exactly unique, but more different than back in the days. Womb of Pestilence was, in my opinion, a slight decline from first position, but that is merely because I like Darkthronian style rather than the French style. But these new albums are kind of closer to the second one, but I think it somehow improved a little bit in terms of style. Never changed style too much, that is to be given, between the first and second album, and even less so with the later albums. Totally solid discography with 4 albums, and that's not a lot if you really think about it. They have been out there for 30 years. But it means that when you have only one lineup member, it takes the time it takes, and that's pretty much of it. And obviously very, very hardcore linked to the underground Finnish black metal scene. So those who know, and those who don't, probably never will. Then we'll go to something different with Baptism, and this is the newest of them all from 1998 rather than 1995. You might wonder why I'm taking this before Förgjord here, because here's not obviously going in alphabetical order. The reason is this: while they started after Förgjord and Warloghe, they came second when it comes to releasing music, and that is by Demo 1998 with Satanic Rituals, and then moving on to Sons of Ruin and Terror, and finally The Burial Midnight in 2002. But I already went to Baptism retrospective about a year ago, so I'm not gonna recap it full because it makes no sense. I'm merely pointing out the basic information here. So, much like Warloghe, Baptism is very much like one-man thing, officially anyway. However, I do know that when it comes to songwriting, especially the later stuff, it's more than Lord Sarcophagian. But what started here was a very, very raw end of black metal, kind of a primitive, and let's be honest about it, not that good. Things started change when the Burial Midnight came to be, a little bit clumsy compared to whatever happened later on. But I mean, big improvement, big step from the demo ages with, Baptism. Then moving on with, the Splits and Black Ceremony EP and final Wisdom of Hate, the band started slowly changing, not too much, but step by step moving away from this raw end of black metal. And if we just skip to the two latest albums, As the Darkness Enters 2012 or The Devil's Fire 2016, these are kind of like different breed, almost like a different band. Sure, black metal all the way, but these are more polished, more atmospheric, and in my opinion, better songwriting overall. But the change didn't happen overnight. I mean, you have all these albums, and step by step, the band kind of went for not exactly cleaner sound, but that too. But more like pushing away that raw end of black metal, which was probably more like a thing when you have a new band, when you have your own project, and then you have the kind of a clumsy first steps and you're figuring out what is your style. Now, I think Baptism has matured very nicely over the years and release by release. But there is a big difference if you start listening, for example, from The Devil's Fire and then compare it to the first album or the demos before that. But like I said, I went through the lyrics, I went through the musical differences and all that stuff in my relevant Baptism retrospective video, so I'm not gonna recap it all here. Just pointing out that while they started as raw black metal, much like Förgjord and Warloghe, they changed style, so they stand a little bit different and apart from the two other bands included in this video. Then the last band, Förgjord, is from Pieksämäki, smaller city in somewhere like not exactly northeast and not super east either, but closer to eastern side of Finland than anything else. Whereas Warloghe is pretty much in the center point of Finland in terms of north, south, east, west, and Baptism was always a little bit on the western side of things. Förgjord is coming from the eastern part of Finland, smaller city called Pieksämäki, and their member list was a little bit different earlier on, meaning it's two guys, Valgrinder and Proskrutes Thanatos. And these two guys always kept doing it until, anyway, third guy, the Phlegane drummer, BLK or Black, joined the ranks. Past members mentioned two other guys from 1995 onwards, but they didn't last that long, so pretty much for a lot of years it was just these two guys taking care of the whole band. And I remember getting in contact with, Valgrinder already some 20 plus years ago when I received for the first time something for review from them. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it must have been either the second demo or could have been this compilation Henken and Veren. And this is where it gets curious. They started in 1995, had a couple of different iterations and different monikers and all that stuff. So finally, in 1999, they came to be at Förgjord. So in that respect, the newest of them all. But it took quite a few years before they made their first album in 2008. So if you consider only albums for checking out and all that stuff, it seems like they're quite new band. Less than 20 years in age. But they have been very, very active past few years, past 10 plus years actually, making albums and EPs pretty much every year now. But whatever they started early on was very clumsy, much like Baptism already, so they were not exactly very good band back in the 90s or early 2000s when it happened. And these were very much like the kind of a first steps in a way, making their own black metal. And, there is nothing worth mentioning in that sense. They were not exactly bad, but they were nothing like, wow, you gotta check this out or check these guys out or whatever. But things started shaping up when they started doing albums. So they kept the raw end of style, obviously, but they kind of also became so much better with songwriting. This is what usually happens with a lot of bands, but unfortunately not always. And when they moved on with the second album, 2012, they kept the style going on. Songwriting wasn't that different. However, I think Ajasta Ikuisuuteen is better than Sielu Vihollinen, but that's just my opinion. And pretty much what happened every album after that, like Uhripuu from 2017, 5 years after the second one, and then another 2 years later, Ilmestykset, then another 1 year later, Laulu Kuolemasta, and another 2 years later, another 2 years later, they had these albums, Ruumissaarna Part 1, Perkeleen Veri. By the way, all, as you can see, are pretty much in Finnish. There are some, words used, like here it is Latin, but mostly it's Finnish, like tietotuus and kuolema, the path, truth, death, henken vere, into the spirit and blood, Ajasta Ikuisuuteen, from here to eternity, and so forth. They had these very, very, dramatic titles in a way, and also very, very much tied to kind of, when you have, I'm not looking for a destination, but more like you're destined, to become something. So they're like almost like prophetic in a way. But I've liked their chosen style. They're not very typical in terms of Finnish black metal, and this applies both to the lyrical things and themes in the band as well as music. They have always kept kind of a distorted vocals. I think that's one of their trademarks, and also very distorted guitars, which is another trademark by them, given how melodic they can actually be. It's always very dark in terms of music, despite which album you check out, but you always have this like very lo-fi production, and it's almost like to a degree that it's not because of the equipment or lack of skill, but almost like we want to do it like this. And that's just chosen style. It's not for everybody because it can be so lo-fi that it can borderline noise, at least in some people's opinions, I'm sure. But their style can be very catchy, and it can be very dark, very death-like, and in matter of speaking, a little bit different than most bands in the genre. What is curious that when you look at their themes, like it mentions things like Satanism, lycanthropia, Sabbatian history, I don't think this tells you even half the truth, because there are lots of like these evil cult things, murders of people, young ladies, or cults, killing probably, or at least abusing kids and all that stuff. So there's kind of a death metallic thing going on in the sense of lyrics sometimes, like dealing with these, murders and violence and weird cult behavior. But I really like that they have gone outside your typical black metal box, and as such, they don't sound like anything else. I haven't heard all of their material over the years, but for example, for this video, I went through all their full albums as much as with the other bands. And I've heard and reviewed some of the EPs, I guess most of them during the years. So pretty much, I guess I could say I have something like 75% of them covered in terms of like understanding their music and listening to it. So I think I can say enough that I know their style pretty nicely. But I'm not saying I'm an expert or anything, obviously. But the point here is, what I'm trying to say is that no matter which album you pick, you will find out very quickly whether or not that is your cup of tea. Rawer end of black metal with the distorted style. And there are some people who like it really, really a lot, like the best band coming from Finland. And I kind of agree, because I really like their dark style. However, I wouldn't mind if they cleaned their sound a little bit. Why so is not because I would dislike raw end of black metal. I don't. But sometimes their songwriting is almost like begging to be less distorted. So kind of a cleaner, more polished and all that stuff. But that is just a matter of preference rather than saying that they're doing it wrong. Either way, in my opinion, one of the most curious bands in terms of black metal coming from Finland, because they never were the kind of a band that would like go gigs or tours, and it doesn't even seem to fit their bill, because they have always been this kind of a surrounded by this weird aura, partially because of their violence and partially because of their given style in the music. I like them a lot, and I guess in general, if I had to pick one band out of these three, this would be probably my favorite. I don't like to do too harsh comparison, because this is not about reviewing the material, just kind of a guiding through what you might find in case you wanted to explore some of these bands and go for the recordings. What it's worth, I know people from all of these bands, and I can say I consider all of them my friends, and I obviously consider them to be good or decent human beings, smart enough and likable enough. I'm not saying they're the guys that would maybe resonate with everybody out there, but yeah, whatever I'm saying is all good black metal bands with people I could, stand by, because they're real deal, not some bullshit poser shit. So what it's worth, you heard it from me. So now you go explore these bands. Links are to their respective Metal Archive sites, are linked into the description box, so you can just start checking out their music through that. For example, Warloghe's case, not likely to find them on Spotify or whatever, but with Förgjord, pretty much you can do it, as well as Baptism. When everything else fails, you can go for YouTube search and find most of their music out there. And in case you fail with that either, always go for the physical product. Might take some time and money and effort for you to find them, but if you're a true fan, I think that's what you gotta do. Now off you go, piss off, start listening or not, it's up to you. This is 10th episode in the series, and more coming your way. Take care.